welcome everyone to the first Plurilingual Lab speaker series event of the semester, but also of the new year. My name is Alexa Ahuja. I'm a PhD candidate here at McGill. I'm also the Plurilingual Lab speaker series host. On behalf of the whole team, we want to wish you all renewed energy and health for the new year. So today we're very excited to have Dr. Cenoz and Dr. Gorter from the University of the Basque Country, who will deliver a talk entitled Pedagogical Translanguaging in the Context of Multilingual Education. They will discuss the theoretical foundations of pedagogical translanguaging and its applications in the classroom, as well as how such practices may also be challenging in minority and heritage language contexts. So Dr. Cenoz and Gorter will have 1 hour for their talk. Here are a few words on our Zoom etiquette. So please, if it's possible for everyone during the talk to keep your video and sound off. You can always use the thumbs up and hands clapping features if you want to interact with the speakers, as well as show appreciation if you want. It should be noted that the talk will be recorded and available in the Plurilingual Lab YouTube channel a few days after or a couple of hours after the talk. The talk will be followed by a 30-minute discussion period that will be moderated by my colleagues, Paul and Ben. The discussion period will not be recorded for your convenience. You can always post your questions either in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question directly to the speakers. Dr. Cenoz and Gorter, we're very excited to have you, and the floor is yours. I will now stop sharing my screen.
No. Yeah, I know.
So if you'd like, you can start sharing your screen.
Okay, I think it's okay now. So first, I would like to thank very much the Plurilingual Lab Speakers Series Coordinator, Angelica Galante, for her kind invitation to be here, and also other members of the lab. We have known them, some of them, for quite a long time, and other young members of the lab that are introducing us, like Alexa, and then for the discussion, Paul and Ben. Thank you very much. Well, I must say good afternoon for some, good evening for others, and thank you very much for being here with us today and for having the opportunity to share our work. The title of the presentation is Pedagogical Translanguaging in the Context of Multilingual Education. The outline, I'm going to show it. I'm going to start with focus on multilingualism, translanguaging, and pedagogical translanguaging. And then Durk is also going to discuss a bit of the results of pedagogical translanguaging and go on with translanguaging and minority languages and some final remarks. So let's start. Focus on multilingualism. If we look at this figure, we see the main idea we have when we are, for example, with 3 languages, but in the curriculum. But it could be 3 languages, it could be more, it could be 2, or it could be 2, it could be 3, it could be 4, any number of languages. What we have is that we are going to look at what these languages have in common, not seeing them as completely separate from each other. So the idea of focus on multilingualism is that it looks at the relationships between languages when conducting research, teaching or assessing different languages, not only languages, but also when doing content, in fact. And this is related to the idea that hard boundaries between languages, we want them to become softer. So if we look at what hard boundaries mean, this is related to the idea that you cannot use any elements from other languages. Traditionally, the idea no code mixing in the class, no code switching, the idea that one teacher should be identified with each language, that it happens in many contexts, that we try to avoid that teachers are multilingual. It is like it's only a speaker of one language. The idea of no translation, try to say everything as a teacher, explain everything, even if it's difficult in the target language, and the idea of independent syllabuses. So if there is coordination, maybe coordination in different ways among the French language teachers or the English language teachers, but not so much going across languages. We see that or a lot, I would say, differently, because we look at students as multilingual speakers. Sometimes they can be still in their early stages, and we look at their repertoire and what they have, the languages, the elements they have in the repertoire, in the multilingual repertoire, and we look at that as part of the social context and completely related to the social context. So what we do with this is that we look at what we can see as more multilingual views. If we compare monolingual and multilingual views, we see that in the case of monolingual views, the idea, the belief is that languages contaminate each other, while with multilingual views it's more like languages reinforce each other. The idea with monolingual is that the aim should be balanced multilingualism for all situations. This idea that you are a kind of failure if you are not completely balanced in the two languages or the three languages, and you say, can you be balanced completely for all situations when you have different experiences in different languages? So we say multilinguals use their languages for different purposes. They have different skills in different languages because they may be writing formally a lot more in one language than in another. They may be having informal conversations more in one of the languages. And of course, if we think about going beyond two languages, is even more difficult to think of balanced. I mean, as we say, the day has 24 hours for the monolingual and 24 hours for the multilingual. How can you have the whole experience of everything in every language when you are using them in different ways? So, and also the idea, the monolingual idea that there is non-existing monolingual societies as a reference. This is, we can say, an old-fashioned idea because nowadays we can say it's impossible to find monolingual societies, and real multilingual societies are more the reference, and real multilinguals are more the reference if we look at language, multilingual education and language teaching from a multilingual perspective using a multilingual lens. So if we look at translanguaging, and I'm sure that is such a successful concept that I'm sure that you have heard about it, many of you at least. And but we can see at two dimensions. We distinguish two dimensions of translanguaging, and one is pedagogical translanguaging, and the other is spontaneous translanguaging. When we talk about pedagogical, we are talking about instructional strategies that integrate two or more languages as a pedagogic theory and practice. And when we talk about the spontaneous, it's not instructional strategies that have been planned, but the reality of bilingual usage in naturally occurring contexts where boundaries between languages are fluid and constantly shifting. I mean, in this case, we are talking about speakers who use elements that are associated with two languages or belong to two languages, depending on the way you understand languages. So what we see is that there is really a kind of continuum between pedagogical and spontaneous translanguaging, because we can say, okay, it's the two ends. It could be, but there could be also situations, for example, in the class, it can be planned to have translanguaging, but there can be some instances of spontaneous translanguaging. And there can be a spontaneous translanguaging also that the teacher uses the opportunity to associate that with some function that can be more pedagogical. So it's not a dichotomy, but it can go more towards one end or another end of the continuum. The origin of translanguaging is in Wales, and Ken Williams in 1994 defined translanguaging as a pedagogical practice which deliberately switches the language mode of the input and output in bilingual classrooms in Wales. We are talking about the situation of Welsh and English bilingual education, where there is a policy to protect and develop the minority language, which is Welsh. And Ken Williams was working on his thesis and visiting many schools where in some cases there were more Welsh speakers and in others more English speakers, but bilingual schools with Welsh and English as languages of instruction. And he found some interesting pedagogies. For example, and this is an example from Williams' thesis. You don't have to read the text, but just to get the idea. It is about the Industrial Revolution. So we are in a content class in history, and we see first A is a picture, B is a text in English, C is a picture, D a text in English, and E is a text that is in Welsh. And the task, there are several tasks with this that he explains in his thesis, but the task that he finds and he says is the most interesting is that imagine you have the information from the pictures and from the texts processing in two languages. And he says, imagine that you lived in an industrial town during the 19th century. Write a diary entry for the 15th July, 1845. Remember to include information about the house, street, and town. And in order to do this, you need to understand the Welsh text and the English text. You need everything. And this is an example that he gives of what translanguaging is. And we are talking about a long time ago, 1994, because other uses of translanguaging are more recent. So the idea that is also given by Louise Baker and Johnson Baker in 2012 is that translanguaging requires a deeper understanding than just translating, as it moves from finding parallel words to processing and relaying meaning and understanding. So what would like to see is somehow the difference between translanguaging in its origin and translanguaging as is usually understood, mainly in the US. So translanguaging in Wales, and here we have Ken Williams, is first identify successful and planned bilingual pedagogical practices at school by he was visiting several bilingual classes and trying to see which practices worked. And among them, he found translanguaging with an alternation with having input and output, or having input in more than one language and then output in the other, but completely planned and designed by the teacher. So define the characteristics, label them as translanguaging. That's what he identified, and he gives the characteristics. And then he proposes their extension to other bilingual classes and schools. Well, if we look at the way translanguaging is understood in the US, and of course we have Ophelia Garcia. By the way, she's here in this picture. She was visiting us and is in in Donostia, San Sebastian, where we live. And but look at the way it goes differently. It goes kind of in the opposite direction. Observe natural and planned bilingual communicative practices in different contexts. So let's look at the way bilingual speakers communicate. That's the idea. And of course, where Ophelia is based in New York, the number of, for example, English, Spanish bilinguals is really high. And observe the way they use language, define their characteristics and label them as translanguaging, and then propose their legitimization by accepting them at school. And the reasons for that are that then they will not, it could be more successful for students if they are allowed to speak the way they usually speak in when it is spontaneous translanguaging. If that is legitimate at school, legitimized at school, it will be better for them to be more successful at school. So we can see that it goes really in different directions. But let's see what we are talking about, pedagogical translanguaging. And of course, this is closer to the origin of translanguaging, because it's going to be, as we said, pedagogical translanguaging is planned, is designed by the teacher. There are activities that are designed by the teacher. Here you have a secondary school class from the Basque country. Okay, so what we define, what we think pedagogical translanguaging, this is planned by the teacher inside the classroom and can refer to the use of different languages for input and output, and to other planned strategies based on the use of students' resources from the whole linguistic repertoire. The idea is we consider that pedagogical translanguaging includes translanguaging as it was originally understood by Ken Williams in Wales, but it also includes other strategies as long as they are we use elements, resources from the whole linguistic repertoire, and they have been planned. They are not spontaneous, but they have been planned. So in that sense, pedagogical translanguaging has some characteristics. And if we look at the type of program, we are talking mainly about situations in which we are talking about multilingual education or second or additional language education. And here we could include immersion programs, as you have in Canada, and we also have them here in the Basque country and in many other places, or minority language reinforcement programs that also have, or content and language integrated teaching. I mean, programs that we are not with the idea of shifting to the majority language. It's not that we have a bilingual program so that students end being fluent in the majority language, and we forget little by little about the minority. We are not talking about that. We are talking about students becoming bilingual, multilingual, because we reinforce different languages. So the type of a student can be multilingual or emergent multilingual. And the idea is also that the student could be a student of the majority language or of the minority language, or both if it is an early bilingual, of course. The aims are linguistic and academic development. I mean, that there is increased proficiency in the languages and also academic development in content subjects. The organization, as we said, is planned, is designed. It has been organized to be done that way. And the approach is multilingual, heteroglossic, because we are using different languages in the classroom. We are using different languages. A basic concept here is metalinguistic awareness. And the idea is that through pedagogical translanguaging, students can become aware of the whole linguistic repertoire. This can happen at different linguistic levels, like phonetics, lexicon, morphology, syntax, pragmatics, discourse. It can happen with different abilities like reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And it is linked to the original Welsh concept of translanguaging, but it includes a wide range of pedagogical practices. We can say that there can be different levels in a way of intensity when we talk about pedagogical translanguaging. The most intense is when it includes some reflection and has the idea of developing metalinguistic awareness. But it could be also, in some cases, I mean, that is one possibility when we are really comparing different elements of different languages in the same class, using different languages in the same class, but in a way that has been planned. Another possibility could be, as we have seen, having input in one language or some resources in one language and some in another language. That's a possibility that is closer to the original idea of translanguaging. And it could be, let's say, a bit of another way that is not as intense in a way. It could be to integrate pedagogies, but having only one language in each class, but integrating and coordinating what teachers are doing in the different languages. We have done different possibilities. There are different possibilities like that. If we look at resources, I mean, we have been working and many other researchers have been working with resources in different languages at different levels, but we have, for example, cognates, morphological awareness, writing, translating, bilingual readers, different things in different languages. Even, I mean, we can call when they have the characteristics of pedagogical translanguaging, we refer to that as pedagogical translanguaging, even if not all authors can refer to that as pedagogical translanguaging. But let's look at some examples. For example, if we have a text in science, we have about digestion, and then we try to see some words from the text and to find cognates in the other languages. The text is in English, but they have to, in our context, they have to find if there are words that are related in, I mean, it can be, sometimes it's because there are borrowings and sometimes because they have a common origin, but they are cognates. And we see if they are in Basque and they are also in English, as we can see in this situation. And then the idea is that they see that sometimes, for example, I mean, there can be some simple ones. Well, there's simple, that is not used in that way in Basque, that's why it's blank. But for example, insoluble is the same in Spanish and English, but in Basque it's different, but somehow it has this part of dissolve and then of a suffix. So it is the same idea, even if the suffix goes at the end, but is to think and to relate and to realize that by using resources from the other two languages, it is going to be possible to understand certain words, or it can help in reading comprehension. So another possibility can be also including other languages. For example, after a text that was on the water cycle, we have been working with this in primary school, and then we give some words or find some words that you find in the other languages, and then or you give them. And not only in this case, in our case, we have English, Basque, and Spanish in the curriculum, and in secondary, we also have French as an optional fourth language. But it can be other language, can refer also to other home languages, because of course we have speakers who speak other languages at home, or not only one more, but more. So it gives also the opportunity to relate that to other languages that are not included in the curriculum. We have been working also, for example, with compounds, and then you find interesting things like that Basque is more like English than Spanish. In this case, for example, of Liburudenda, another shop, the names of shops. Like in Basque, you say Liburu is book, and then that is shop, so it's the same structure, while Spanish is a false friend because libreria is bookshop and not library. So it's always one of these difficult ones. But what is interesting is that, for example, in our context, students always think that Basque is different from everything else because they've been told that, because Basque is a language that is not Indo-European, it has a different origin, whatever. But then you realize that at certain, for some structures and from, like, for example, for compounds, it works many times in the same way. Because like in the case of here is the students finding other words, and of course they find more parallels between Basque and English. They were doing this exercise with the Spanish first, but then they find like Loradenda is flower shop, or Liburudenda bookshop and coffee shop, whatever. I mean, they find more parallels between Basque and English than what is usually the case, that is Spanish and English. But it's using the resources so that they see more how the language works. We can also work at different levels. And for example, we've been working in primary school with this course in 3 languages. And then we have been doing things like how do you start or how do you end a story, and then comparing the 3 languages and seeing then in parallel how it works, and working with them in parallel. And then we have also been working about the structure, because what happens, it depends, of course, on the language. But even if you have languages that are quite different, as it is the case, I mean, for us, Basque is quite different, whatever, but we are sharing, we are in contact with French and Spanish in the Basque country. The Basque language has been in contact with French and Spanish for many centuries, and with the school systems of both countries, everything. So the way you write a text in terms of the way you should arrange content, the way you should organize the text is very similar in the 3 languages. So we could, and many times it is taught completely at different times without coordination. So we could do, okay, now you see the different parts of how to write, in this case, it's a narrative text, and then you will, after looking at these different parts, you can write a text in the other language, So these are, well, these activities and many others that we've been working with, but now Durk will go on a bit with the results a bit of these activities. So. Yeah.
You are muted.
Okay, now I'm unmuted, but I don't see myself. I lost my PowerPoint. Let me see. Wow, it doesn't matter so much, but where is the song?
I do it for you.
No, I'm there. I can go to the. This is okay, no?
Yeah.
You can all hear me now also. Okay, I go. Okay, Jasone told you, okay, about that we have been preparing materials, that we have been designing different activities, that we try to implement this pedagogical translanguaging. And that's exactly what we have been doing. And this first slide that I'm showing you is based on some results that we got from some testing that we did in the experimental group and in the control group in a primary school where we applied the pedagogical translanguaging. And the first results that I want to share with you are about, on the left-hand side, a morpheme identification task, and on the right-hand side, a word derivation task. And you can see already, I've made a red circle around it, that if we look at the experimental group, they were a little bit better than the control group before we started in the pre-test, but after implementing our activities, they were even better. So both groups have improved, but the the experimental group has improved more. And you can see it also on the right-hand side. Same thing for the word derivation task. Also there we see that on the left-hand side, the experimental group has increased quite a lot, and the control group has also increased. In this case, also in both cases, quite a bit, but still it has worked better in the experimental group, and we can conclude that we have increased the meta-linguistic awareness of the students. We've done several of these testing, but I'm not going to show you all those. I'm going to go on to some other instruments that we used. And we had, for instance, a focus group with the students. And you see here some quotes from these focus groups. They are in Basque. They were conducted in Basque by the researcher, and she was asking them about their feedback and what they thought of all the activities they had to do. And as you can see, the first student, number 23, says it has been easier to work with the three languages together. The researcher is asking, really? And then another student is answering, yes, the concepts are better assimilated in this way. And the researcher is probing a bit, and why are these concepts better assimilated this way? Because you have them better in the other languages too. And so you see again, these students are kind of positive about that. This is what we found in the focus group. We also found it by doing a questionnaire. I'll show you the results of a questionnaire with 9 different items. I'm not going to go over all the 9 items, but if you look at, for instance, item number 2, it's confusing to learn Basque, Spanish, and English at the same time. You see that most of the students are disagreeing with this because the average score is 3.42 on a score on a minimum score of 10 and a maximum score of a minimum score of 1 and a maximum score of 10. You also see it in another negative item, number 6, I prefer to learn language separately. And you see that these students do not want to learn languages separately after they have been going through this experiment of us, and they like to do translanguaging. That scores high. And the highest is the basic idea of pedagogical language. It is helpful to analyze Basque, Spanish, and English jointly to promote understanding, and the students really got the message, you could say. We also got that in the example that Jasone gave about the telling of stories, the discourse, and even there we find that when the students have to do a self-evaluation at the end of the module that they do, they have to write, as you can see on the bottom, and I've got the translation there, and then we ask them, what did you learn? And then they say some words come from the same word, and words are similar in Spanish, Basque, and English. These are primary school students of 11 years old. And then the second question was, did anything surprise you when you were working with 2 or 3 languages at the same time? And then the student is answering, I learned a lot to read and to understand things. And this is what we found time and again with the students, that they were very positive in their reactions towards what we kind of did to them in the experiment, trying to break through the borders of the languages and using them at the same time, side by side, trying to apply our principles of pedagogical translanguaging. But of course, not only the students are important, also the teachers. And we also got some feedback from the teachers. We had individual interviews with the teachers, because we had the Spanish teacher, the Basque teacher, and the English teacher. We were doing our experiment in their class during the time that was allocated to them in the timetable. And we found things like it's necessary to make students think of what they previously know, to make them reflect about a topic, because their input is always positive, not only for themselves, but also for the rest of the class. So it was important that the students reflect, and also that the students have input, so that the other students can learn from what some already know, and so they can add to it. And so that also is in the second quote: when students are given the opportunity to provide information they already have, to give it to the classmates and to the teacher, it can increase their self-esteem, and they can consider themselves to be important. So it's also good for the individual student that they can participate in this way. What's happening? Okay. We also had a focus group with the 3 teachers at the same time, and then they say the experience has been very positive, and the students liked especially the fact of the combining of the 3 languages. And another teacher added, all the students thought it had been helpful to use the 3 languages they use at school, and to take advantage of what they knew from before. And she says, I definitely will plan to do more multilingual lessons than what I have done so far. So that is also a kind of a very positive outcome. We also asked in another course that we gave, we did a course on professional development where we applied all our ideas. And then we asked also the teachers for written feedback. And here we found that we asked them, for instance, do students learn more or less of these multilingual activities? Because the teachers had in this course been doing some of these multilingual activities in their own classes. And here we see again that this teacher answers, I think they reinforce the previous knowledge and they acquire new by doing this in this way. The second question, do you see yourself including more multilingual activities in your classes? Because, well, you never know if they want to apply it or not. And we got quite a lot of this same type of answers. Yes, we're working on it and anything. And now we hang it on the wall. We do posters, signs, we make it trilingual because I do Basque, Spanish, and English. We do pictures. So this is another typical answer that the teachers in our course, they really wanted to work with the multilingual activities. And then, of course, the issue is you have some teachers, there are other teachers in the school, and then will they be convinced even if they have not done the professional development? And this teacher says, I've already started to sell it to my colleagues, the translanguaging, because I believe in it. And so it seemed, and that was the general outcome that we have of this professional development course, was that the teachers were quite enthusiastic to continue with using these kind of activities and also to apply it in their own class. But there is a problem, or possibly a problem, because we are, of course, dealing with translanguaging and in a minority language context like the one of the Basque Country. And as we have participants from all around the world, I've seen, and some people are in similar minority language contexts, others are not, but I'm going to give some basic information on our context so that you can understand a little bit better why we are worried when it comes to translanguaging, or why the teachers are worried, I should actually say. So this is where we are at this moment broadcasting from, so to speak, the Basque Country, the country that has 3 provinces in the south of France, and it has 4 provinces on the Spanish side of the border, and we are in the province of Guipúzcoa, which is kind of in the middle here. Well, I will not go into all the details, but it's a small country in Europe with some 3 million inhabitants. The amazing thing, what has happened with the minority language, and that is contrary to many other minority language situations in Europe and also around the world, is that the number of speakers has increased over the years. You can see here that according to the estimates of the government, it has gone up from 419,000 speakers in 1991 to 631,000 speakers in 2016. 2016 is the last year of the social linguistic survey. Or in percentages, 24% of the population was able to speak it in 1991, and now almost 34% of the population can speak the language. thing is, with speaking the language doesn't mean using the language. And that is something that has also been investigated among the people, if they use the language when they can speak it. And what we see in this graph is that only 1 in 5 of the Basque speakers really are Basque users, in the sense that they use more Basque than Spanish, or as much Basque as Spanish. But most of the time they will speak Spanish, or they will speak very little Basque, or they will speak less Basque than Spanish. So there is a huge challenge, you could say, to get people to speak the language. And this challenge we find back in education. And that's where I'm turning now, because it is thanks to education, or it's because of education, that the number of speakers has gone up, and that there are more speakers today than there were 35 years ago. It's mainly because there are 3 models of education. There's an A model. Spanish is the medium of instruction, and Basque is only taught as a subject. Then there is the 50-50 model, where Basque and Spanish, well, there are some variations in there also. That can be 60-40, it can be 30-70. It's the B model. And then there's the D model, with Basque as a medium of instruction and Spanish only taught as a subject for 3 hours per week. There's always English in all the 3 models. And you can see the percentages there. 3% of the models today, of the children that are entering the school, 3% goes to the A model, 18% goes to the B model, and 78% goes to the D model. It wasn't always like that. And here you can see the increase that has happened over the years. Between 1983 and 2015-16, it has gone up a lot, the D model to 78%, and the A model has gone down a lot. So when they started with these models, there was very little in terms of the D and the B model, and the A model was completely dominant, but now it's the opposite, and that is the big transformation of the schools in the Basque Country of the last 35 years. And that has led to an enormous increase in the proficiency in Basque, especially in the younger age groups, as you can understand. And you can see that here in this graph represented, again, 1991-2016. And you can see that in the 16-year-olds to the 24-year-olds, there has been an increase of 46% in this same time frame. And you can see that in the old times, if I may call it like that, in 1991, still 33% of the 65-year and older were speakers of Basque, and today it's only 22%. And that is, of course, because the different age cohorts have gone through time, and we see the influence, especially of Basque education, and the increase of the D model reflected as an outcome in this graph. So this looks all very positive. There is still the challenge of the use of Basque, and we can see that also in the school situation itself. Here you see a study of the use of Basque in the classroom, one of the outcomes of this study. And we see in primary school that the green bar graphs, the 51% and the 28% are, let's say, use of Basque inside the classroom of all students in all models. But we see that 80% almost uses Basque inside the classroom. So that's quite positive. But if we then go to secondary, we see quite a sharp decrease. In secondary school, only slightly over 40% of the students uses Basque inside the classroom. So there is a gap or there's a transition from primary to secondary where the students start to use a lot less Basque. It's also interesting to see what happens in the schoolyard. There we see already in primary that as soon as the children leave the classroom and go to play in the schoolyard, they use a lot less Basque. It goes down to half, more or less. And also in secondary, we see there was already less, but there's still a decrease, and there's an increase in only Spanish in the schoolyard among secondary school students. So this is a big challenge of Basque education, and that is also where our pedagogical translanguaging comes in. But of course, the question is this translanguaging desirable? Our teachers, one of them said, we have to protect our languages. If we don't do it, big languages, meaning Spanish, will be the winners, and small languages, meaning Basque, will lose. So this is, let's say, the basic fear of the teachers, the basic assumption they have. They want to protect Basque They want to reinforce Basque. That is a need that is strongly felt by the teachers. And this is an extract from the focus group where they say the researchers kind of concluding, therefore we have to reinforce Basque more from the beginning. And do we need to do the same, the reinforcement with Spanish? And then the two teachers say, no, 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 we don't have to reinforce Spanish. And English. And then the three teachers and the coordinator who was also there, they all say, no, we don't have to reinforce English either, because it's a high prestige language in society. Everyone wants to learn English, but there is a need to reinforce Basque. And that is exactly what we try to symbolize in this graph, that you can have translanguaging going in different directions. Translanguaging can go in the direction of the majority language, and that means that if you allow the majority language into your minority language classroom and you just allow it to take over, the students will only use Spanish in your Basque classroom. That's the fear of many teachers. But it can also go in the direction of the minority language. That means that if you have your Spanish classes and you're also using Basque in the Spanish class, it compensates for what happens in the Basque class. One way of saying it. It also can happen in the English class, where you can introduce Basque in the English class, which is not there until now because there's a strict separation of language. But you have to see that there is the idea that translanguaging can go in favor of the minority language or can go against the minority language. And that is something that we have been reflecting upon, because that is, of course, important to consider when you introduce these pedagogical translanguaging strategies in the classroom. You have to really carefully design it and think about it and know exactly what you're doing in a way, because as a teacher, if you just let it go, you may lose more than what you gain, whereas we are convinced that with pedagogical translanguaging applied in the right way, you will gain a lot, also for the minority language. That's why we have some guiding principles of what we call sustainable translanguaging. We think that it's important for the promotion, the protection of the minority languages to have a number of principles that you use. And one of them, for instance, is to design breathing spaces for using the minority language. It's not that you do pedagogical translanguaging all the time with the three languages side by side all the time. No, you also need spaces where the minority language is used. And you also need to develop a need to use the minority language through translanguaging. Because of course, all these students that we have in these schools are multilinguals. They can use the different languages according to the situation, according to the need, according to the other person they speak to. They can use it according to different, for different reasons. And so we need to create situations where they also want and need to use the minority language. And doing that, we think it's very important that we develop this metalinguistic awareness. That is why we showed you some examples of how you can create more or higher levels of metalinguistic awareness. And we can use the multilingual resources to do that. At the same time, we think it's very important also that the learners' experience with the multilingualism, that we use that to create more language awareness, and that we use it also to create multilingual identities of the students. We cannot just call them one language identity. They are not only Spanish speakers or Basque speakers or English speakers, even though they're often labeled like such. They're labeled as, oh, you're a Basque speaker and you're a Spanish speaker. No, we have to, we think we have to make them aware that they are multilingual speakers that have a multilingual identity. And of course, we also know that these students, they do a lot of spontaneous translanguaging outside of the classroom. They will use Basque, they will use Spanish, they will use a bit of English, and they do a lot of that spontaneous back and forth moving between the languages. And we think it's important that we link this to pedagogical activities. You can include that kind of activities in your classroom, and you can link the spontaneous translanguaging that is happening anyway. You can link it to certain pedagogical activities. Let's go back to the breathing spaces a bit, because we're not the only ones who are kind of defending or promoting or proposing these breathing spaces. It's already an idea that was in Fishman when he was promoting the revitalization of minority languages. Also, Jim Cummins said it, that it's important to have immersion programs to create largely separate spaces for each language, so that each language can also be used in a separate space. Lewis and his colleagues also said that the promotion of flexible language arrangements such as Translanguaging could easily encourage people to focus more on the majority language. So we also need to focus on the minority language. And even Ophelia Garcia has written that it's important to preserve a space, although not rigid or static, but in which the minority language does not compete with the majority language. And that is exactly what we also think, that the languages should not compete, but they should support each other. That the languages are there as supports in that situation of the classroom. That's the way we look at it. And we kind of can also visualize it in a kind of triangle, that on the one hand, we need translanguaging spaces. So there has to be a room for using 2 or 3 languages at the same time in different activities where they reinforce each other, where you use the different resources that are there already. But on the other hand, you need a kind of breathing spaces, especially for the minority languages, because after all, the schools, especially here in the Basque Country, and that's also the case in many other situations, are there to promote, to protect, to support the minority language, because the school cannot do it on its own, but the school can be a very important support for the minority language. And that's why we need, on the one hand, these translanguaging spaces, and on the other hand, the breathing spaces. And we're not going to tell you that it has to be 43% of one and 57% of the other, or it is not like that. You have to design a program in which you include both types of spaces, and it's not an either or always. It's not a rigid kind of thing either. It is kind of design that you have to do. Okay, some final remarks then. Some teaching implications. We have mentioned the focus on multilingualism. So we find it very important that you focus on multilingualism than rather only on the target language. So not in the English class only English, but you have to focus on the multilingualism that's there. It's important to develop pedagogies that consider the speaker as multilingual, and their multilingual repertoire and the social context that you are in. So it is not that our Basque model can be implemented around the world. No, it's our social context, and even inside the Basque country, we have many different situations. So we have to adapt it, develop the pedagogies that are considering the type of student that we have. They have to consider their multilingual repertoire, and we have to consider the specific social context that we are in. And we have to provide enough space for the minority language. That's extremely important. So there are some aspects also related to language learning, some implications, and we think that it's a basic understanding that multilingual speakers are not a kind of sum of several monolingual speakers. We also have to study the complex trajectories of the students. What have they gone through in terms of the languages that they have learned, and how have they learned them, and what can they do with the different languages, so that you can shed light on many different processes. And from our focus on multilingualism idea, the multilingual speakers use their whole repertoire in the social context. That is what is very important. For the minority languages in particular, we think it's necessary to soften the boundaries between the languages, but that it has to be done in a sustainable way. The way that we set with our principles, that we try to create breathing spaces, that there's a need for the language, that we create metalinguistic awareness, that we create awareness about languages and a multilingual identity, and that we also respect and even use the spontaneous translanguaging that's going on. Because the sustainable translanguaging, we think, the way we see it, it's rooted in the reality of minority languages, and it allows for these breathing spaces, and it allows for creating a need to use these languages. That is, we think, is very important. And finally, 3 general recommendations. First of all, translanguaging pedagogies need to be introduced gradually. We think it has to be done really planned. You need translanguaging pedagogies is a planned activity, but you also have to plan it carefully, gradually, and you have to adapt it to existing school pedagogies. You don't need, I mean, on the one hand, we have heard that our ideas are kind of revolutionary, but it's not to change the world from today to tomorrow. It is a gradual, step-by-step process that takes time and that takes consideration, and that has to be designed very carefully. It also, and that's what I tried to emphasize before with the context, it has to be tailor-made. Every context almost is different, and you have to take into account the languages used in a wider context, in the neighborhood, in the community, in the region, but you have to take into account the differences between the speakers. You have to see how multilingual the community is, and also the different levels that you're dealing with. And then you have to also consider what are the multilingual competences that you want to achieve, what are the aims you have, for what kind of levels do you want to reach in each of the languages. That can be quite different in different situations also, because these kind of general recommendations we think can be applied in many different situations. And finally, the third general recommendation is that we think that it is compatible with minority languages, that this kind of introduction into a minority language situation can be beneficial for the minority language, because we are convinced that by applying pedagogical translanguaging, it is an efficient and it is a good way to learn languages better, and at the same time to be able to learn the content through the languages. So this is what we wanted to present. We want to refer you finally to our video. I'm pretty sure that some of you have already seen the video. It's quite easy to find it on YouTube. It gives a little summary of what we have been saying here in 5 minutes. Let's make the most of multilingualism. That is our slogan, and that is a kind of behind everything. If you want to academically know more, we have published 2 edited books not too long ago: Minority Language, Multilingual Education, and Multilingual Education Between Language Learning and Translanguaging. We've also published several articles. Recently, the Sustainable Translanguaging has the principles more in detail. We also have been, and we have not said anything about that today, but multilingual assessment, we've also been publishing on that. And more recently, we also have been relating our ideas to second language acquisition, studies in the Modern Language Journal, and we have a special issue out last year on pedagogical translanguaging, navigating between languages at school and at university. Thank you very much. And now I'm going to stop this here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cenoz and Dr. Gorter. I think everybody can give a warm round of applause, maybe virtual applause. Thank you very, very much.